We are about to go back to Washington, D.C. with our next panel. Just a couple of brief things before I turn this over to C.P. Smith, our moderator for the next panel. Somebody mentioned to me that we do have a Twitter hashtag of OpenGov, which apparently people are following throughout the day today. There's several Twitter feeds that are retweeting stuff going on here. And Chip Rosenthal, who is here, who's the chairman of the Austin Telecommunications and Community Technology Commission, the advisory board to the City Council, reminded me that if you want to stay in touch and you're on Facebook, there is a Facebook group called Austin iGovernment, which is a way for people to stay in touch if you're particularly interested about the application of a lot of the things that we're talking about here to the City of Austin opportunities that we discussed. And the last thing is that I know it's cold in here. And I've been told there's not much we can do about that because even if they turned off the air conditioner, it wouldn't make any difference in here by the end of the conference. So we just have to bear with us. And Adam, if you're really suffering, Adam tells me he's got some fleece jackets in his office that he can loan you. So our next panel is going to be moderated by C.P. Smith, who is also one of the students in the policy research project this year at the LBJ School.
Thank you. First of all, just a quick reminder to maybe check your cell phones so we can have them on silence. And this morning we talked about the importance of transparency, and then we kind of segued into the use of technology to communicate the necessity for that openness and transparency in government. But that will present challenges. And in keeping with those challenges, we are going to now embark on a high-risk act of actually conducting a panel in D.C., moderated from Austin. And so everybody, you can wave to them, and panel, you can wave back, please. Okay, very good. Oh, we got a longhorn. There we go. You got the longhorns back. So with that, let me just go ahead and introduce our panel first, and then I'll set some context. And then just to give you the format of what we're going to do here, essentially I've asked each of our panel members to provide a brief for about 7 minutes or so. We'll walk through that. I'll lead off with a couple follow-up questions and some questions that I got for myself for the panel after this morning's presentations. And then after that, we'll open it up to the floor. So first off to the far left is John Wonderlich. He is the Sunshine Foundation's policy director, who holds collaboration examinations in government and works with both the Congress and public communities. And then in the middle, we have Mr. Clay Johnson. He's the director of Sunlight Labs, former founder of the Blue State Digital Symposium that actually was born out of the Howard Dean campaign, and was the lead programmer for the 2004 Dean of America campaign. But he is most proud of his experience as a waiter at Waffle House, where he says that he actually learned most of his tricks and trade. Okay, to the far right, we have Mr. Kshemendra Paul, and he is the chief architect for the Federal Enterprise Architecture for the Office of Management and Budget. And he provides policy and process guidance for the actual enterprise architecture for the entire federal budget, an annual IT investment of $75 billion, of which he doesn't get a single cut of that. He was formulative in the technology architecture and standards development for the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, including its formulation and startup. So obviously somebody that we will be able to make several pointed questions to about how that is progressing. He has been honored as one of the top 100 federal leaders in IT and has over 25 years of experience as an IT executive and entrepreneur. So with that, if I could please greet our panel with a round of applause. I'm very excited about this panel because our policy research project focused on incorporating two elements that are absolutely important. The first element is the necessity to have transparency and openness in our government. The second part is how do we do that? And to connect the two is where our policy research project came in to be, and essentially the value added that we've provided to the public and to ongoing projects is that connecting those two different concepts that have overlapping interests, and we can actually take advantage of technologies to further one of the aims in the other project. So in terms of openness, of course, as Professor Chapman has pointed out in his presentation, this was founded on the Freedom of Information Act. And as he also pointed out, with technology and changing times, that maybe that deserves additional attention and, in particular, the ability to bring in new technologies to tie that together or to enhance the capabilities to provide more openness and transparency to our government's decision-making processes. So the other part of it is, of course, how do we do that? And one of the major constraints that any project has is how much is it going to cost? How do you get it done? Who's going to do the work? And when we actually start talking about some of the nuts and bolts of how we do that, using technology is an outstanding way to actually reduce communication costs. And what I mean by communication costs is before, if you wanted to do Freedom of Information Act, you would have to get the form, you'd have to write the letter, you'd have to fill it out, you'd have to mail it, it'd have to get to somebody, and then they'd have to pull the data, they'd have to compile it, return it back to you, and that's at the first point you actually have the data to look at. But all that data already exists. And what we're going to talk about is, in part, how do we improve the process of getting access to that data that is already there. It's resident. People are making decisions based on this data, but because of the barriers in communication, of which hopefully technology will reduce those and mitigate those, we can actually effectively allow all of us access to that information. So we had Senator Bill Bradley's image of essentially taking a particular bill and through a series of links, getting it down to the point where you can actually see what were the decision makers involved and who maybe funded those decision makers to arrive at that conclusion. We also had an image or a vision as presented by Professor Chapman on where we had Google Maps, where essentially those were mashups. We're taking disparate information or resources or repositories of information, of which the federal government is the premier repository of information. And how do we get essentially that information from disparate areas, different pools, different resources, make them available to us as citizens so that we can interpret, perceive, and make our own decisions on that data so that we, in turn, as interested citizens, can re-engage the process, can contribute to that dialogue that is absolutely necessary to keep a vibrant and healthy democracy. So that is why I'm really excited about this. And that is why these gentlemen will be able to contribute to that discourse and providing some additional insight into some of the issues that we have. I provided them beforehand with 3 talking points. I'll share those with you just as a basis for their following comments. So as a starting point, I said, given President Obama's agenda to promote a more transparent and open government, what role do you envision technology will have in assisting President Obama's transparency in government efforts? The second point that I asked them to address was, given that the government will be responsible for being a repository of high-quality primary budgetary data, what are the government's strengths and weaknesses in providing data services to its citizens? And then what role do you envision citizens and public interest groups have in assisting the government define and provide technological solutions to ensure maximum access to government's data. Obviously, I've taken my class in bureaucraties, so you see I've done very well on that. And if anybody made any sense out of that, well, it'll be credit to the panel members. So with that, I would like to first start out with Mr. Wonderlich, if you wouldn't mind, kicking us off. I don't know if any of you noticed, but before we actually started the panel, all three of them were into their BlackBerries or iPods. So obviously people that are very well connected with technology. So with that, Mr. Wonderlich, please.
Thank you very much. And can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. So first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I love the way that you frame this, so much that I structured my comments very closely around the questions that you asked. So I think that's a great way of approaching these questions. So first of all, on the question of how central technology is going to be to Obama's efforts to open up government, I think it's extremely essential. I think it's the main vehicle through which we're going to see a more open and more accountable government. Right now, we're going through two really fundamental shifts. One is cultural, and the other one is technological. And that shift is happening culturally right now. You can see through the policies and the rhetoric coming out of the Obama administration, the Open Government Directive that's coming up, and this is certainly an issue that he ran on as a central platform. So we're seeing an enormous shift toward this technology. And that makes sense because technology is a fundamentally disruptive force. Our experience as consumers, our experience as researchers or as students or as parents or as children, our experience of the world is fundamentally changing through our ability to use technology. And so it makes sense that the role that government plays is going to similarly change. And the way that I view that change is happening is through empowerment. So we're being empowered as citizens to see what's going on in government and to participate in government. And the government is similarly empowered to be an information provider and to be a problem solver. And both of those groups, citizens and government, have to work through and really invent the way that these new roles are going to work for themselves. So I think we're watching Obama and the Obama administration recognize the new role that they have to play. I think that's reflected when you hear them talking about the all hands on deck mentality. I don't think that just means long hours that new members of the administration have to work. I think that is a recognition that citizens are expected to participate, and that everyone has a new role to play. So that's the first question. I think certainly coming from the Sunlight Foundation that we would, of course, say that technology plays a central role in creating open government. But the transformation that we're seeing happening now, I think, bears that out. On the second question about the strengths and weaknesses that the government is going to face in being an information provider, I'm going to start with the strengths that government has. And the first one comes with the unique responsibility government has to be an information provider. And government has that responsibility because they're the only ones that have the information, right? If you're the only one that can create currency or that can collect taxes or do or to raise an army, then that comes with a unique set of information. So the government has a responsibility to provide that information, and they have the benefit of unique access to our vital national data. Government also has funding that no one else has. Now that doesn't guarantee efficient use of that funding, but no one else could immediately put together the kind of funding that we're seeing go into the creation of recovery.gov right now. So the government, if you look back at some of the other enormous problems that the country has faced and has decided to face head on and confront, like any number of problems in our past, when we commit the resources to them, we've been successful. So the government has the ability to commit to solving the problems of an open and connected society in a way that no one else has the ability to do. And then the third strength I would point out as far as the government facing this problem is the new commitment. I think the cultural shift that we're seeing everywhere else in society, both in businesses, in terms of healthcare, in terms of everything using technology, the government now has this renewed sense of confidence and strength through having a leader at the top of the executive branch that appreciates that, that ran a very technological campaign, that had a history of being an open and accountable senator throughout Obama's Senate career. So I think that is puts government, the American government at least, in a position of great strength. As far as weaknesses, I think we could probably have a whole panel about the barriers to creating openness in government, especially through technology. But a couple that I would just point out: the cultural and institutional barriers within government. There are a lot of people. We deal with Congress a lot. An example I like to use is that congressional staff tend to be people with political science degrees or lawyers, and they don't tend to be the people that understand how publishing free online data should work. And similarly, the way the executive branch is set up in order to hire people and to create incentives to recruit people within government, that's not necessarily set up the best way to recruit people competent with technology. So that's one barrier. Another institutional barrier is the way that funding works. And maybe Kshemendra can talk about this. But I think we've often in the past seen people do what we've sometimes referred to as budget hugging. So technology in the executive branch often cuts across a lot of different agencies and has to work in an interagency manner, which is the opposite of how budgets often work in the executive branch. So we need to have a new way of thinking about spending money on technology in the executive branch so that we don't have perverse incentives around what technology you choose to invest in. And then just one more barrier I would point out is the role of contractors and whether we have competent technology in government. And I think that's something that we have to spend some time thinking through. How can public technologists participate in government, and what's the proper role for contracting when we want to talk about having a government that can use technology appropriately? And then the last question was about what role the public is going to play in creating a technologically competent or an open and transparent and accountable government. And of all the questions, I think this is the one that we know the least about what the answer is going to be. I think the public is going to have an enormous role in helping to set policy and to do oversight. I think the government is just now learning to tap into the very long tail of public policy expertise that exists in universities and in small towns and in businesses and in just our expertise nationally is distributed and is often disconnected from actual policy decisions. And as we think about any kind of reform, not just technology and transparency reform, I think we're just beginning to see how those conversations are going to change. We're seeing that happen certainly in Congress as we go about openness reforms through the work that I've organized at Sunlight through the Open House Project. We've seen this enormous sort of informal advisory committee form around technology reform in the House and Senate, and suddenly that's created a new network of staff within Congress that are creating real reforms. Just in the last week, we saw the Senate for the first time release the XML of votes, the data of how senators were voting, which for years they resisted by saying senators should be able to release votes data however they choose. So we saw them finally recognize common sense after a broad set of the public said, yes, we all want this data, and then staffers within the institution said this is a good idea, and then senators decided to push for it. So I think we're starting to see these things work, but I think they're also very early models of how the public can become involved. And that's something that my organization is trying to help do, is to work through how the public can be involved in helping to fix government, and working through what that should look like and trying to do our part in inventing and helping it along. So, thank you.
Thank you. And if we want to continue on?
That would be me. Is that right? Okay. I'm Clay Johnson. I'm the director of Sunlight Labs. I work with John at the Sunlight Foundation. This is actually my first video conference. This is just really cool. So, how's it going, Texas? All right. I'm a little disappointed because I was promised Salt Lick barbecue, and it's not here. But at least I don't have barbecue sauce all over my face. So I'll try and do the best that I can and being presentable. So I think government right now is really going through the process of rebooting itself. We have a new president, a new administration who used the internet really to get elected, following off of people like Howard Dean and John Kerry. I think a lot of candidates saw the power of the internet using the power of the internet to get elected, and now they're looking at, okay, well, how do we use this to govern? And I think you see citizens who have been engaged in these campaigns really thinking about how government can be better using the internet, and they want to participate in government as they participated with these campaigns. And it's very exciting. The metaphor I always use in my head, mainly because I'm imaginative, is that last scene from the Indiana Jones movie, the first Indiana Jones movie, where they take the Ark of the Covenant and the government sort of buries it in an old warehouse somewhere, and they zoom out, and they, it's just this giant warehouse, right? It's just huge. And that's, I think, what we're trying to eliminate to a certain extent. We're trying to take that government warehouse and digitize it and make it so I can type in a few buttons on my keyboard or my iPhone and find the Ark of the Covenant wherever it is, whatever my Ark of the Covenant might be. In order to get there, I think the first challenge that the new administration has to handle, and what our government really has to work on in all three branches of government, is a challenge of simplicity. With the excitement of new technology comes the excitement of government spending, and people tend to get a little excited about new technology and want to do everything at once. And my chief concern is really government trying to skip from 2001 to 2009 without going through letters B through Y, so to speak. So what does that mean? It means that the government should be very pragmatic about how it applies new technology. Here's a great story for that. So I was a lead programmer of the Dean campaign, and afterwards I got together with three friends of mine to start this company called Blue State Digital. We did Obama's website. But right after the Dean campaign, people came up to me and said, "Clay, you raised $50 million for Howard Dean on the internet. I, too, would like $50 million. Can you build me a website?" And my job very quickly became, no, if I give you new technology, you will not raise $50 million. Howard Dean raising $50 million online was a function of him being Howard Dean, not me being his programmer. And I think we're seeing a lot of the same thing happening, or the potential for that happening inside of the government could go on now, where people are going, well, if we can just buy some really great new technology, then we can win. But really, simplicity is where we'd like to see the government to go. And let me explain what that is. When it comes to the data that government should be putting out, there are a set of 8 principles. You can look up Google 8 principles of open data in the government, and you can find it. But the 3 that I really stick to are: data should be public. So if it's not on the internet now, it doesn't exist. The government needn't be burying information in trapper keepers in the basement of the Capitol and calling it public. It needs to be online. And again, if it's not on the internet, it doesn't exist. It needs to be real time, so it needn't come out months after it's been processed. It should come out when it's processed in a timely, rapid information, and it should be raw. So in other words, I don't want to see a summary of a government contract. I want to see the government contract itself, and I want to be able to interact with that if we're talking about a database of government contracts. Some challenges that the government faces, I think, with this. I think government has the opportunity to change the procurement process in order to create opportunities for small businesses and outside organizations to interact with data that government puts out. If you think about it from a wider standpoint than just budget, government data creates markets and business opportunities. So from just doing government contracting, that's certainly a market, but there would be no weather.com if there was no open government data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. There would be no Google Maps without census information from boundary information from the census. This kind of transparent government information creates markets. But also on the procurement side, I looked it up before I came here, and the government paid in 2008 a grand total of $36 million to Microsoft for SharePoint, which is what it uses for a lot of different agencies use for internal collaboration. And while I appreciate Microsoft and think Bill Gates is a wonderful person and great philanthropist, and I have Windows on one of my laptops, I don't want to get into that debate, but I use Backpack and Basecamp at work, and I pay $39 a month for it. And I don't see why federal agencies couldn't be using some small business cheaper solutions for things like this as well. And then the third challenge I think that government faces is how to make it so that open source developers can really contribute their new technology to the government in a way that makes sense for government. There are laws that prohibit this from happening to a certain extent. So, for instance, it's illegal to volunteer for the government your skilled trade. So I can't go and say, hey, you know what, Kshemendra, I'm gonna build recovery.gov for you for free. Now that's a good thing, because then Kshemendra owes me a favor, and there's reasons why those laws are in place. So I understand where that's going, but we need to find gateways for true technical talent to work inside of the government in an open source way so that they can create change. Because there are developers on the outside who really want to dramatically change their government. In Sunlight Labs, for instance, in the first quarter of this year, we did this thing called Apps for America, and it was a contest to see who could develop the best web applications based on our data that we basically refine from the government and provide to the public. And we had some amazing applications get developed, over 45 in total, all open source applications from developers who actively want to change their government. The winners were, the winner of this contest was called Filibusted, which is perhaps the best name known to man. You can see it at filibusted.us, I think. What it does is it tries to figure out which senators are the most obstructionist in the United States Senate, which senators are trying to block the legislation the most. This is a creative thing that we would have never thought about inside of the Sunlight Foundation, and certainly I'd imagine that Congress wouldn't put this kind of product out itself. But the developers are there and want to create this kind of thing. Another one's called Know Thy Congressman, which allows you to highlight the name of a member of Congress on any web page that you visit and click on a bookmarklet in your web browser that says Know Thy Congressman, and up comes a pop-up of that member of Congress's bio, where they're from, how many earmarks they've applied for, what the total dollar amount of those earmarks were for, what their campaign contributions looked like, what the top industries were that they were going. So you can go and look up, Lockheed Martin is the #1 government contractor according to usaspending.gov. Thanks for that. And that money gets spent mostly in Kay Granger in Texas's district. And wouldn't you know that the #1 employer of contributors to Kay Granger also happens to be Lockheed Martin. So citizens can start drawing this kind of oversight, and developers are really wanting to create all kinds of ways for government to either be more accountable, be more efficient, or be more participatory with citizens. And I think it's really the challenge that government has ahead of it is how does it harness this energy both from the inside and also create opportunity on the outside for these people to do that. So that's I think that's my talk. I'm good and done.
Thank you.
Hook 'em horns.
Small round of applause. We need to work better on that. Kshemendra, if you want to continue on.
Sure. Thank you, CP. Thank you for inviting me. I want to acknowledge, you didn't mention it in the intro, but we met about 9 months ago when you were being persistent in trying to find out information about the federal budget and transparency, and we're bouncing around OMB and eventually got to me. We spent some time looking at the federal enterprise architecture, and then arranged a mini symposium on the max budgeting system, and then you and some of your colleagues came up here to Washington a little while ago. So it's been an interesting journey. It's great to see it culminating in this event. As you mentioned, my primary role is I'm the federal chief architect, and that's a policy job. I define the frameworks and guidance, assess agencies as they build architecture, provide leadership. Something interesting happened back in the December-January timeframe. The Obama transition team was talking about doing a stimulus package. And as that was developing, it became pretty clear that there was a commitment to using the Recovery Act to provide unprecedented accountability and transparency for the taxpayer dollars coming out through the Recovery Act. It became clear towards the right around inauguration time that we'd have to put together a website, guidance for implementation of the Recovery Act, and the like. We did that in a pretty accelerated way. The Recovery Act itself was signed, I believe, February 17th. We launched a website, www.recovery.gov. That day, it got, I think on the first day, about 3,000 hits per second. Next day, we issued the initial guidance for implementation of Recovery Act out to the agencies. And I think the second day after it was signed, we put out the initial version of the architecture package that described the data elements, reporting standards, initial concepts for how the other recipient reporting would work. Trying to put into action some of the things that you've heard from my colleagues here on the panel. A week after the bill was signed, President Obama addressed a joint session of Congress and mentioned recovery.gov several times during that session. The site got up to about, I think it peaked at 12,000 hits a second.
Sell advertising.
We should sell advertising. It was probably one of the more popular websites in America that night. Right now it's stabilized at plus or minus 1 million page views a week. It spikes depending on what's going on. We've been tracking activity around the Recovery Act, the flow of dollars from the Treasury through OMB to the agencies. As the agencies put out funding notifications, do the block grants out to the states and localities, move through the competitive process with grants, procurements. It's all happening. Right now, agency and program plans are coming due, and in the very shortly, next week, they should be up on the site. It's about 200 programs that are in the Recovery Act across about 28 different agencies. We updated the guidance and put it out again on April 3rd. Between the two versions of the guidance, it's been downloaded about just under 100,000 times. So it's quite interesting to think about being involved with a national scope activity like recovery.gov, where on the one side we're trying to build a close to real-time financial supply chain tracking system, right, looking at dollars as they move through the federal system to agencies, to recipients, to subrecipients, and then collect that data across all these different agencies, levels of government, different domains of government, private sector, in an intelligible way where we can bring it and aggregate the data and make it useful to citizens on a website in terms of providing feeds for third parties, for you all at the LBJ School, for the Sunlight Foundation, for recipients, for states to be able to use that data however they see fit. What's been striking about the Recovery Act and I think it's something that, echoed by my fellow panelists, has been the shared vision that, an idea whose time has come. Unprecedented accountability, transparency, accepting the fact that all these different participants, whether they're federal agencies, states, municipalities, will need to raise up the level of their business processes around how they take federal dollars, how they account for those dollars, the results that they show for those dollars, be able to describe that through standardized data that we can collect, aggregate, and then share out to the American people. So, I've gone through some detail, about the Recovery Act because I think it really shows, transparency, participation, collaboration, and action. One last thing I want to highlight, and we haven't quite gotten there yet. On the site recovery.gov, you've got the ability to, share your story and things like that. But the ultimate vision is actually what we like to think of as crowdsourced accountability. The idea being that, let's say you're renovating a school in some locality. The local PTA wants to get involved, wants to be able to provide feedback on how that project is going, share pictures of it, influence the direction to be able to get to an outcome that's appropriate and maybe better for that community. All that is accounted for and is part of the vision for the Recovery Act and recovery.gov, right? That so it's not just transparency; it's participation and collaboration also. And that brings me back to the open government memo that President Obama signed on his second day in office. Government should be transparent. Government should be participatory. Government should be collaborative. Really powerful words, and you see it in action with recovery.gov. That's all I really wanted to say in the opening. You can answer questions.
Okay, thank you. One thing that I'd like to share with everybody, again tying in with the policy research project, the first part when you try to tackle something as huge as a commitment towards advancing the cause for open government, transparent government, is who do you talk to? And who is it that has the ability to maybe move the levers and press the buttons and maybe allocate resources? And of all the resources, time is the most precious. So as part of our policy research project, a small team went to Washington, D.C., and actually had the chance to meet all of our colleagues, all of our panelists that we have today. And we're very thankful for the time that they shared with us. At the very beginning of our project, and I think that this speaks tremendously about the commitment that we have in our society, within our civil servants, is you have a very senior officer in the federal government, Mr. Kshemendra Paul, and he made consistently time for us, and he felt a personal dedication to communicating, to anybody that was interested on this and assisting us in our efforts to, again, advocate the movement for open government and transparency. So I take that as a very positive sign that we do have people on both sides providing government service and also public interest groups advocating for more. And then essentially that dialogue between the two actually furthers the whole promotion of a concept of, again, transparency and technology. With that, I'm going to kick off a couple questions, and then I'll open it up to the floor. Only because, I should add for the benefit of our panelists that in case we lose you for VTC, I have sock puppets here, and then I will be able to speak on your behalf. And like anybody that's using technology, it is my obligation to, of course, blame your side for any technological problems that we have. So in the spirit of that kind of forthrightness, and only because the panelists are far away from here in case this causes any more conflict, I wanted Mr. Paul to kind of follow up and answer Clay's very pointed comment that the government can't use open source software and the like, and let's just make sure we have some boxing gloves around there in case it's needed.
I think I have those in my desk drawer. We can take care of that.
I think
very nice.
It must have been lost in the video link translation.
It's probably on your side. It's probably
yes, exactly. Yeah.
You're tuned into the wrong VTC. Actually, there's no issue with the government not using open source. We are extensive users of open source as well as licensed proprietary software. And as a matter of fact, we really are big proponents of standardization and use of open source. I think you'll find more of that. I think part of what Clay was saying, if I may paraphrase you, Clay, was that it's difficult for us to accept and plug in open source developers into government projects. And that's probably true, but there's more to it. There's nuances. For example, we use open source software all the time, and we also publish standards, voluntary consensus standards, all the time. Those standards, if somebody were to build a reference implementation of those standards and that reference implementation was open source, we would have no problem using that. So there's a pathway right there. Go back to recovery.gov. It's part of the vision that the Recovery, Accountability, and Transparency Board has put forward. And I need to be clear that the OMB had a big role in the startup, and we continue to have a role in terms of guidance on the Recovery Act. But the Recovery Board, now that it's stood up, has taken over complete ownership of the technology solution, the website, and all the rest. But the vision has always been that we'll be collecting data in a standardized way and then publishing it in a standardized way. That standard publication of data, consistent semantics, well-defined protocols based on open standards will allow a thriving third-party community to develop, whether that's good government groups, whether it's entrepreneurs, whether it's participants in the value chain. And one of the big use cases of the data is states or localities getting data from all recipients, but in their geography. So they can develop, if you're a governor, if you're a county executive, if you're a mayor, you can generate situational awareness for what's going on related to Recovery Act based on the data being geocoded appropriately. Right? So, that's a huge use case that we're seeing, separate from the good government use cases or the entrepreneurs. Clay also mentioned, and he got it all out, proper pronunciation of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The weather data. Also think about the genetic data, the Human Genome Project. Another great example of government-sponsored research relating to data sets that will hopefully bear fruit in terms of disease prevention, cures, wellness of the population. I mean, the list goes on. Census data, the direct marketing industry, huge industry. All those credit card offers you get in the mail.
We have you to thank.
Right? I mean, that comes out of census data, right, in terms of slicing and dicing. So there's a lot of different government data sets that are based on standards. And I think what we're seeing here is going from a rudimentary way of describing some of those standards or the data to much more strong leverage of open internet-based standards, which should supercharge, but I think the rate of adoption, the velocity of value generation in the economy and civil society.
I just wanted to give Clay or John the chance to follow up on that if they had any others, and to encourage a discussion over there if it springs up.
Well, I mean, the first thing I need to say is I forgot to say this in my talk, but as of today, my boss surpassed me on Twitter followers. So if you could all follow me at CJOH on Twitter, I'd really appreciate that. I got to catch up with her. It's really disturbing because I get the internet better than she does. But don't let her hear me say that.
She was on the purpose board, wasn't she?
No, I don't think she made it. No, I mean, yeah, I don't think, CP, that, I mean, what I'm not saying is that government can't use open source software. Government can use open source software. I mean, the NSA has its own distribution of Linux. So government uses open source software all the time. It's about how government can foster a relationship that sort of, I think, blurs the line between who's a government contractor, who's a contributor to a piece of source that maybe isn't procured, and how government can really provide ways for people to contribute without being, considered bribing the government or that kind of thing. And then the other half of it is, how do we change the procurement process in government so that government software can be made by anyone, and I think more people can compete for government contracts, including smaller businesses, because I think it's actually really difficult now. And I'm not a policy expert. I'm just a simple caveman, but I don't know how to bid on a government contract, and I don't think a lot of people know how to bid on government contracts, especially small independent software vendors. And I bet if they could, they'd love to provide services for their country.
Thank you. John, I'd like to follow up. This morning we had the benefit of Vivek Kundra actually provide our keynote speech, and he talked about the importance of not just webifying, if that's a new word, I don't know if he invented it or not, but webifying government and institutions. In particular, we talked as well in some other forums about how a lot of perception of going e-government is essentially taking that same form that you'd have to fill out at DMV or maybe down at the property taxation, local taxation office, and it's now in a PDF file. That's not quite the complete vision, but maybe if you could share some insight that you might have on what it's going to take to actually get beyond the webifying of institutions and actually get to perhaps a more of an e-participation or integration of that data.
Sure. So I think there's definitely something to be said for putting government services online that used to not be online. So, for example, every time I get a parking ticket in D.C. and log onto the website dc.gov and pay it, I think Washington, D.C. has the best technology, and I'm so gracious for it because I didn't have to go anywhere and I could just pay it. And so they get so much goodwill out of moving even just a couple of simple things online and providing those services. So I think that's really valuable, but I think there are a lot of other things that they're going to have to attack, like is a big chunk of public information available online? Is public information that pertains to influence or that can generate new trust between citizens and government available? Are disclosure forms available? So there's influence data. There's also procedural information. For example, if I want to go to a city council meeting or if I want to follow a topic through a congressional committee as they consider it, that's a whole other set of information that needs to be online and accessible and easy to follow if you want people to really be able to engage in the debate around healthcare reform or the energy reform that's coming. So all that procedural information has to be online. So that's another level. And then there's the level of collaboration, which I think is an even tougher question to ask, which is how can you structure a government decision or an interaction between government employees and the public so that there's actually something valuable. So I think we're going to see a lot of attempts that are too ambitious, where we try to solve a huge problem and then you just have a bunch of comments. And we'll have probably a bunch of attempts that aren't ambitious enough. And so it's going to take a lot of design and a lot of thought to figure out how people can actually collaborate and participate in government. I think that's a really complex question. And it's a question where experimentation is entirely appropriate. So we're looking forward to seeing the successes and the failures as government struggles with how to solve all those problems.
If I can follow up on that really quick.
No, you actually can't.
Watch it, buddy. Let's not confuse transparency with participation. I think it's really great that members of Congress are using Twitter, but that doesn't excuse, that's not transparency. That's them participating with people, but it's not them passing laws that give citizens the ability to conduct their own oversight, which is what we're really after here. And I think it's really important as we sort of move together in this sort of transparency movement that we do not sell out transparency for participation. While I'm very happy that you can pay your parking tickets online, I would prefer it if, I could see the campaign contributions and contracts that came from the DC City Council. But that's because transparency is my issue and not participation.
Yeah. And, I'd like to add something to that, too. I mean, with the big theme here is on broad-based transparency, participation, collaboration based on standards, Web 2.0 kind of a look and feel. But government has been actually doing a lot of transparency, participation, and collaboration within mission contexts. So, for example, before I came to OMB, I was the chief architect of the Department of Justice, got heavily involved with our law enforcement information sharing activities with state and local law enforcement, tribal law enforcement. And there's elaborately developed structures for governance, standards development that are participatory and collaborative that date back decades. You find that same sort of pattern elsewhere across the domains of government. So it's not unfamiliar in terms of how to do this. We do it in a mission context. What is new is doing it in this broad-based way and doing it as more of a horizontal platform, if you like, versus these vertical mission areas. And scaling it up. It's, the numbers we're talking about here are much more large scale, and the impact is more dramatic. The velocity of things go potentially faster. But I think that's an important nuance not to lose sight of.
Thank you. Although I have tons of questions I could spend, in the interest of fairness, because we've had such a great turnout and crowd, I'd like to open it up for about another 15 minutes for questions. So you want to reboot? Okay, we're just going to take about 30 seconds here for Heather. Can you cut it and remake the connection, please? And then we're going to prep for some questions over here.
So we've talked a lot about the policy side of things, the technology side of open government, e-government, but I haven't heard anything today about the user end of e-government or open government, or whatever the correct word is for the day. And I've put up wikis and put up blogs and a variety of Web 2.0 kinds of projects, and it's pretty hard to get users to contribute to them, or if you do, it's the most techno savvy, committed kinds of folks. And I wonder if there's any kind of, usability testing or ethnographic testing or focus groups that you're doing to sort of understand what users want out of these kinds of projects, and what kind of design elements work best for certain kinds of groups.
Yeah, I can take a first pass at that and tell you what we're doing, and then my colleagues can tell you what we're doing wrong. Two great examples, Recreation One Stop and IRS Free File. Two examples of initiatives where we're delivering services to citizens in an innovative way. Now, this is in a mission context. Right now, IRS Free File works with TurboTax. You can go to it directly. It works with all sorts of other software programs, and citizens can file for free. I forget exactly what the threshold is. It's been changing over the years and going up in terms of the adjusted gross income. Rec One Stop's another great example of one stop, one place to go to book recreation opportunities, campsites, and things like that on public lands, whether it's parks or national forests or things like that. I think there's also a recognition, though, that for a lot of what we do, it's about putting the data in a semantically consistent way in the public domain and letting entrepreneurs or civil society take on the challenge of delivering finished products. I think that it's in many aspects of government, it's not that we're going to have the best possible user experience with a set of data, but we will be the authoritative source for that data, and we have an obligation to put it out there so it's maximally useful for others. And so I think that's kind of a third example or a third use case I'd like to highlight.
That's what I was gonna make a similar point, and that's that the best uses of government data are very often the unintended ones. So there are times when defining your audience and thinking through how a site will be used are really important, especially in a services context or in a collaborative context. There are other times where thinking through too much who the audience is or what the user experience is can get in the way. So for example, for data.gov, we'd like to just see the data because the programmers don't care what it looks like. They just want to be able to click on it, even if it's an FTP tree structure, and download a tarball of some database. That's fine because that's the thing that enables the other things to happen. So usability testing sometimes is a great idea and is important, and sometimes can actually be a barrier, I think.
I just want to commend John for saying tarball. It was his. He's got his technical vocabulary of the day calendar, and he did a great job there. One other thing that I want to point out on this is it's actually challenging for government to do a lot of sophisticated analytics right now because government can't always use the same kinds of technologies that we outside the government can use. For instance, cookies tend to be something that's bureaucratically difficult for government to use, which stops them a lot of times from being able to use Google Analytics or any form of other analytical tool because they can't use cookies because OMB, I'm sure Kshemendra did not do it, but OMB put out a memo offering guidance that prohibited federal agencies from using cookies without consent from the agency head. If anybody would like to discuss with Secretary of State Clinton about the use of cookies and get her sign off on that, I wish you luck. But first, you're going to have to explain to Secretary of State Clinton what a cookie is, explain to her that she cannot eat it, and then try and say why it's important for an agency the agency to be able to use it. And that's relatively impossible. There are all kinds of technologies like that government, there's nuance here where government either can't use it or can't effectively see what's going on their website sometimes because privacy advocates are worried that government will use their websites for snooping and entrapment and all kinds of other things. So it's just something to be aware of in the discussion as to how difficult this is and how how tangled this rebooting of government really is.
I have a question. So you just you hit on a problem I think that's really interesting, and I think we've used a lot of really cool words like transparency, collaboration, participation, and then you just talked about the difficulty of measuring usability. So what do you use as your metrics for success? How do you follow the value chain in this presentation of data or the creation of maybe specifically Web 2.0 applications? How do you know that these things are successful?
Well, she saved the toughest question for last. It's actually a really difficult area, and it's difficult not just in the government but across the board in any enterprise. Asking the question, what does success look like, and how do you measure it? Is sort of a core question. One of the things I like to say is that that's hard to answer in general, but it's much easier to address in specific. So, for example, with the Recovery Act, you can start to say, what does success look like there? It's being able to produce data sets that are high quality, high integrity, right? That we can have a good sense where you can aggregate across all the different recipients and be able to track spending in a citizen-friendly way. That's a requirement of the law. So in that particular case, we do need to invest in focus groups and usability testing and make sure that we're using modern and best-of-breed sort of techniques. Going further, though, Recovery Act isn't just about tracking spending; it's also about tracking performance and accountability. So, lots of questions, lots of discussion come up about how do you look and see about the outputs of the different projects. Are you renovating schools? Are you weatherizing houses? And then outcomes, especially at the programmatic and then the macro level. The big macro thing is jobs. A big part of the bill is how many jobs have been created. So can you do that in a way that's credible? So these are more focused questions where you can use best practices and to try to figure out what's the right way to measure that kind of stuff and decide if you've done a good job at it or not.
I'd just like to give the panel one last shot, starting with John. Any closing thoughts you might have? I think we've lost audio. I think we lost them.
It's on your side.
Of course, good, right, exactly. Okay, I just wanted to give the panel, starting with John, any last closing thoughts you might have.
Well, I guess I'll just finish the thought I was on before, and that's that I think that there's a great number of examples being set by individual states and by other countries that we can look to as we think through how to design more open and more accountable government. I think we'd all benefit from a little bit better coordination on an interstate and also on an international scale, while at the same time doing a better job of bridging between the people within government and the people outside government. They're all trying to solve these problems.
Clay?
I'm very excited to have my job. It is a fantastic place to be at the nexus of technology, transparency, and government. This is something that I think we are at the start of a radical change of how our government works and operates, and I want to thank everybody that came to this panel for being interested in this, because we really are rewiring our country from the inside and on the outside too. And I also want to remind everyone to follow me on Twitter. CJOH. It's only 4 letters. C is in Charlie, J is in Johnson, O is in Obama, H is in Howard Dean. Just those, just follow me on Twitter. And thank you very much for your time and attention today.
I wanted to, these are the hard act to follow. I wanted to thank the LBJ School, CP, you for asking and organizing the panel. This is an exciting time to be in public service. And I think I encourage each of you to consider a career in public service, whether that's at the state level, the local level, the federal level, working with tribal government. One of the things that, was a trend over the last couple of years, and I think it's going to accelerate, is that more and more there's a recognition that the challenges our society faces and the solutions, frankly, are cross-boundary, cross domains of government, cross levels of government. So, and there's an infrastructure in place, tools like transparency, participation, and collaboration, or themes like that, the internet, information technology that provide a vehicle for addressing these challenges in ways that maybe weren't possible 10, 15 years ago. It's an exciting time to be in public service, and I encourage you all to consider that as a career.
I wanted to not only thank the panel, but thank everybody that participated here. So if you could give the panel and yourself a round of applause, please. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you.